Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. As Jeffrey said, I am from Paterson, New Jersey, like Allen Ginsberg, so when I was invited to be the Allen Ginsberg Fellow, it was incredibly special for me to think about our shared origins, and also a kind of shared history through Naropa. Anne Waldman invited me some years ago, and I had maybe a few poems published here and there, and she saw something in me, and that in turn led me to believe in myself, and I think that that's what the Jack Kerouac School fosters in people. There are so many people that I'd like to thank. Michelle Naka-Pierce is not here. She wasn't feeling well, but without her, this wouldn't have been possible. Jalynn Chapman, is she here tonight? I didn't get to meet her, but she was also part of the sort of back and forth of getting me here. Charmaine was part of all of this too. Ryan, who's a really good driver, you should know. A very reliable, never went through a yellow light. And I also want to thank Julia Seiko's class and Julia herself for the beautiful broadside. Did you see this broadside? It's just gorgeous. Yes. And my students from the colloquium this weekend were just amazing. So I taught this course, or I'm teaching this course for the first time at my home institution as well on negation, and I feel like their insights are really helpful to me, so I feel like I've learned a lot too. I'm sure I'm missing people, and there's somebody that I haven't thanked, but be sure that everyone who was involved I feel a great gratitude towards. So we're going to do this half and half. I'm going to talk a little bit about translation, because I'm a translator and a poet, and then the second half will be on poetry. I'm going to talk about riddles for my presentation. So let's see, what's the first thing I need to do? Right? Okay. Does it sound okay? Can you hear me fine? Okay. Last year, as I was attempting to translate riddles that the Chilean poet Cecilia Vicuña wrote in the 1960s, I came across translations of Sor Juana's Enigmas, a series of 20 philosophical riddles for which the 19th century Mexican poet and nun left no answers. What I want to share with you tonight, then, are some thoughts regarding the riddle form and the problems it can present to the translator. Part 1, Charmed, I'm sure. Andrew Welsh, in his book Roots of Lyric, shares this riddle. What is black and white and red all over? Do you know the answer? What is it? Yeah, it's an oldie but goodie, right? Yeah. Right, or a zebra with a diaper rash. This is an example of the ways that the riddle, traditionally in oral form, can play with both paradox and pun to stump the listener. The red is likely to be heard as the color red, right? Because it's followed by black and white and red all over. So it undoubtedly confuses the listener. It's a challenge. A riddle is a challenge, so it should confuse the listener. For the translator, the problem isn't solved by answering the riddle correctly. Instead, the riddle lies in the homonym red, in how to translate it, rooted as it is in its source language. So how do you translate that play of red and red? How does one resolve the wordplay in another language in a way that challenges the interlocutor but also gives way to a specific answer? Welsh provides another riddle also rooted in the English language that presents a distinct translation problem. You probably know this one too. In spring I am gay in handsome array, in summer more clothing I wear. When colder it grows, I fling off my clothes, and in winter quite naked appear. Do you know what it is? It's a treat. My daughter got this. She's 7 years old, right? So I figured everyone would get it as well. With this riddle, the bigger problem isn't translating the semantic meaning, and unlike the earlier riddle, there is no pun, but the form seems an important element to consider since much of our pleasure and engagement with the riddle is derived from it. How would I convey in translation the form of this riddle and still ensure that the contents lead the interlocutor to the desired response? I also ask myself, if I were challenged with this riddle, would the rhyme allow me to retain and repeat the unfolding images in my mind, allowing me to resolve it? Or would the riddle's music still ringing in my ear leave me temporarily unable to answer? Northrop Frye, in his essay, Charms and Riddles, argues that the riddle is related to the charm in that it contains a magic spell that can only be broken with a correct answer. He writes, quote, "The riddle is essentially a charm in reverse. It represents the revolt of the intelligence against the hypnotic power of commanding words. In the riddle, the verbal trap is set, but if one can guess, that is, point to an outside object to which the verbal construct can be related, the something outside destroys it as a charm, and we have sprung the trap without being caught in it." End quote. Part of the tree riddle's charm may be its formal elements, but Frye, who also points us to the spellbinding effects of the pun, might argue that the newspaper riddle charms us with its succession of colors in the form of monosyllabic adjectives yoked by a conjunction, black and white and red all over, right? That sort of cadence, that rhyme also charms us and captivates us. Our minds then are drawn into the pattern of both sound and image, preventing the mental leap from the black and white to the R-E-A-D. The answer can also disguise itself within the riddle in the form of a pun, as in this Spanish riddle. Una cosa que no es cosa y lo es. And the answer is hilo. So the literal translation here, I've been told that there's like a red little thing that I could use here. Does that work? I can't see what that's actually doing. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I could see. I could. Yeah. I have it. Yeah, it's still not very easy to do, but the literal translation is. Can you see it in the same way? Let me see. Yes, okay. So the literal translation is on the right. A thing that is not a thing, and it is. That's the literal translation. A thing that is not a thing, and it is. And the answer in Spanish is hilo, or string, except you can see that the answer, hilo, is in the riddle itself, right? So the question, right, the wordplay in the question is necessary to get us to the answer, which is hilo. And what is the wordplay then? Well, we have cosa, which is a play on coser, to sew, right? I'm trying to see it here, to sew, right? And that's in the subjunctive mood, right? As in they would want one to sew. But then cosa is also thing. So to coser is to sew, and cosa is thing. So it's playing on cosa and coser, and then y lo es, and it is, also has the same sound as hilo. And we're going to see when we look at the Cecilia Vicuña's riddles is that this type of riddle, she draws from the tradition of the riddle, but specifically this type of riddle in which the answer is disguised within the riddle itself. Is it the altitude? I mean, El Paso is, it's pretty high up too, but I've been very thirsty here. So let's look at Sor Juana's enigmas. Frye's verbal trap is especially a problem for the translator of Sor Juana's literary riddles, the enigmas, as we shall soon see. Let me give you some background on Sor Juana if you're not familiar with her. Sor Juana was a 17th century Mexican nun sought after in her lifetime for her literary talent and intellect and protected by New Spain's viceroyalty, for whom she wrote poems, among them love poems to the wives of the viceroyalty. And I'll put this in parentheses. Although the love poems employ the, quote, conventions of troubadour love lyrics and Petrarchan sonneteering, end quote, according to Electa Arenal and Amanda Powell, they continue to be, not surprisingly, a source of much intrigue and speculation that she wrote these love poems to these women. It was, in fact, the Countess de Paredes, one of the vice queens with whom Sor Juana had a close friendship, who would arrange to have her first book of poems published in Spain. As such, she was a particularly controversial figure for her male superiors who claimed she had exceeded with her secular activities the bounds of her service to the church and to God. Sor Juana's challenging of their accusations culminated in La Respuesta, or the answer, a response to a public letter written by the Bishop of Puebla under the pseudonym Sor Filotea. The letter, in the voice of a nun looking out for her fellow sister, kindly advises Sor Juana to retreat from her secular studies so as to save her soul. So this was written by a male bishop, right? A bishop, but in the voice of a fellow nun. Right? But everyone knew it was the bishop, including Sor Juana. But it was like this, let me give you sisterly advice about what you should be doing, right? Enough with the poetry, go back to praying. La Respuesta, as a public defense against Sor Filotea's admonishments, presents an important shift in Sor Juana's life as it signals, in many ways, the beginning of the end. According to Arenal and Powell, it is speculated that a number of factors, including the threat of the Inquisition and an unstable socio-political situation in Mexico that would force the viceroyalty, her protectors, to return to Spain, may have contributed to Sor Juana's decision to relinquish her secular studies. She did so by first selling her library and her musical and scientific instruments, and finally by signing in blood a declaration of faith with the now famous line, I, the worst of all, or I, the worst of the world. It's translated in different ways. She would die a year later in 1695. It is in this period that Sor Juana likely wrote the Enigmas, the period right before she dies, when she's moving towards abandoning her secular studies. Glenna Luce, who was the first to translate into English the Enigmas, writes in her introduction to their publication in Prairie Schooner in 2006 that Sor Juana had written the Enigmas, quote, after the theological world assumed she had been silenced, end quote. But the discovery in 1966 by Enrique Martínez López of the manuscript in a convent in Portugal apparently refutes that assumption. Luce explains that it is likely that in 1693, the Countess de Paredes took the Enigmas to Portugal at the request of the convent's nuns. There's a beautiful vindication here. Not only was she not silenced by her male superiors or other external threats, but the delivery of the Enigmas to her sisters in the church ensured a continued intellectual engagement with questions Sor Juana deemed important. It is an engagement that is sustained to this day, prompting a number of scholars to propose divergent answers to her enigmas. Since there are no answers, there's constantly this, well, let's come up with the answers. Some of them arguing that the very answers to them can be found in Sor Juana's sonnets. By not providing the answer which would end the exchange, we are asked to immerse ourselves more fully in her work, the questions looping back into her sonnets. So if it's true that the answers are in her sonnets, once you read the enigmas, then you have to read her sonnets. I mean, that's pretty clever, right? If that's the case, like, come up with a form that makes people never leave your work, right? Is the multiplicity of possible answers to these enigmas nonetheless a complicating factor for the translator? Because we've seen that if we know the answer, then we can think about how we're going to translate the question, right? But there is no answer, or there are no answers for the 20 enigmas. Let us look at the first enigma, followed by a literal translation, then 3 English translations. So this is the first one. ¿Cuál es aquella homicida que piadosamente ingrata siempre en cuanto vive mata y muere cuando da vida? So this is a literal translation. It's not an elegant translation. I just want to point out that this is a literal translation. Who is that murderer? So it's aquella homicida suggests that it's female. Who is that feminine murderer, feminine noun? That piously ungrateful always as soon as live kills and dies when gives life, right? So we see that paradox there, okay? So now we're going to look at the 3 translations. The first one by Glenna Luce, the second one by Stalina Emmanuel Villarreal, who's, I think, a PhD student at Houston. Yeah, she still is. And John Pluker. So these are all contemporary translators. And so we see, and this is all for the same enigma, enigma number 1. So Glenna Luce's is, what deity murders and living dies giving life? Now this is Villarreal's. What is that slayer's strife that piously naughty when living slaughters and dies upon granting life? And John Pluker's, who is that murderess, tell me, so graciously ungrateful she, who kills at once when comes alive, and having given life, she dies. When I read this enigma, this riddle, I am dazzled by the complexity of the Baroque syntax within the perfect little package that is the redondilla's octosyllabic quatrain and ABBA rhyme scheme. I'm just going to, as an aside, I just found out that Ezra Pound wrote redondillas early in his career, like a series of redondillas nobody talks about. So I'm curious to find those. It feels as if I am witnessing a series of somersaults on a balance beam with a nailed landing in the form of a question mark. Like the listener of an oral riddle, the reader is likely enchanted, put under a spell, as Fry argues. But unlike the simpler tree riddle, Sor Juana's does not yield its answer easily, keeping us continually mesmerized in its form. In this sense, I ask myself whether the answer is entirely the point. Whether we remain engaged in the question's form or in her sonnets, we are always in the space of a complex architecture of images and sounds that cannot be demolished with a simple answer. Quote, like all interpretations that profess to say, this is what the poem means, end quote, writes Fry, referring to lyric poetry's riddle origins. Quote, the answer is wrong because it is an answer, end quote. Perhaps that is why answers to Sor Juana's enigmas, like Sor Juana herself, continue to be news, with a fairly recent headline in a Mexican newspaper announcing Sor Juana's enigmas solved. Okay. Sor Juana's intricate Baroque redondilla certainly presents a challenge for the translator. And here we see each translator attempting to solve this problem in a different way. Rather than replicate the form, Luce looks instead to English poetry for useful models that would allow her to approximate what she calls Sor Juana's courteous tone. she finds it in the poems of Emily Dickinson, which Luce writes, quote, are simple and rigorous like Sor Juana's and share her ecclesiastical echoes, end quote. The simplicity in many ways is the result of the translator who, quote, peels away the ornamental gold leaf to reach the structural frame, end quote, as Margaret Sayers-Peden, a translator of Sor Juana, writes. But unlike Sayers-Peden, who sees this as a first step to reconstructing a version of Sor Juana's, quote, Baroque edifices, end quote, Luce leaves us with a stripped-down version whose minimalism allows us to see the question that she sees with clarity. Her desire for precision may have, in fact, led her to condense the piously ungrateful, so here we see the Luce, it's really hard to see from here, also with my glasses. You see? So she translates piously ungrateful from the previous. So, piadosamente ingrata, which is literally translated as piously ungrateful, is translated by Luce as deity, right? So let me read that sentence again. Her desire for precision may have, in fact, led her to condense the piously ungrateful she-murderer into a deity. Villarreal, on the other hand, quote, adamantly accepts Sor Juana's overt rhyme, end quote. She says this in her introduction to her translations, by Ugly Duckling, by the way. But as we can see from a number of her translated enigmas, quote, does not follow strict denotations, end quote. One of the more audacious deviations, if we are to call it as such, is the translation of homicida, or murderer, as the kenning slayer strife, a riddle unto itself, right? Slayer strife is, you have to unpack that. What is a slayer strife? Unlike Luce's aim for Dickinsonian elegance, Villarreal's neck-breaking maneuvers around form result not only in unusual syntax, but also in pairings like, and these are from other enigmas, so she pairs these two phrases, the idle vow and the vulgar wow. She seems to revel in the reconstruction of the Baroque edifice as if it were a collaboration between the 17th century Mexican nun, considered a monstruo or monster because she was such an unusual creature, this brilliant woman, this intellect. She was a monster of her own time, and the 21st century, quote, adult Chicana who claims to have grappled with the coercion of prosaic English as a business language, end quote. The result is, to gather Villarreal's own descriptors, maximalist, postmodern, and transnationalist. John Pluker's translation, as part of an essay by the Mexican poets Luis Felipe Fabre, is the closest, and I've also put that in my own little air quotes, is the closest in form to the original. And refusing to bury the lead, his aquella homicida becomes murderous, right? Not a form we usually use, but it does indicate that the murderer is a woman. And with the Spanish, we know that nouns are feminine or masculine, so it guides us to a certain place. So by having murderous, it gives us an important clue, but I also ask myself, for the interlocutor of the English, is murderous necessarily going to lead to a particular answer? Because one of the answers that's proposed by the many scholars that have put forth answers is that it's esperanza, that it's hope, la esperanza, hope. So it narrows down the possibilities, but is murderous going to get us there? I don't know. What I mean to point out here is that each translator, by privileging different aspects of the question, lead the reader, in my mind, to very different answers. Does it matter, we might ask ourselves, if by withholding the answer, Sor Juana, as Villarreal writes, quote, gives the reader the room for the final word, end quote, and in doing so, quote, allows for a plethora of translations, granting feminisms and aesthetics to be reimagined through each translator's phenomenological lens, end quote. That's a hard word. It may be the case that Sor Juana would delight in the intellectual exchange that each translation could provoke, as she would have been in the conversations the original enigmas likely engendered in her Portuguese sisters. Or would Sor Juana, who valued reason and logic, demand that every translator must proceed from the answer she had in mind, if in fact she only had one answer in mind? It is said, after all, that the, quote, young Juana, while at court, submitted to a public examination of her already notorious intellectual gifts by 40 of the most knowledgeable men of the realm, end quote, and defended herself, write Arenal and Powell, quote, like a royal galleon attacked by small canoes. So, that's a big shadow to have, right, by your side, to have Sor Juana sort of, how would Sor Juana, she was not someone who was just going to wither away. If she saw your translations, I'm sure she would speak her mind. I think that's probably true of any of these kind of huge literary figures when we're translating them, the kind of fear of what they would think. Well, I translated a huge literary figure, but she's alive, so we can talk about it, or I can discuss my translations with her. So the part 3 of this is Adivinanzas, and this is where I talk about my translations of Cecilia Vicuña's riddles. In 1966, the same year Sor Juana's enigmas were discovered in Portugal, words began to appear to an 18-year-old Cecilia Vicuña while she wrote in her bedroom. As she describes it in her 1984 book, Palabra Armas, the words, quote, bodies opened, allowing me entry, and I sensed their interior as they mine. We took turns with the fluidity of bodily pleasure. Were they playing with me or I with them, end quote. The book is in Spanish, so this is my translation for the essay. What could be described as an erotic exchange or vision on that summer night in her bedroom would then lead Vicuña to write 62 riddles or adivinanzas in which words reveal realities, quote, of their own creation. So let's look at one. This is not one I translated, so it's a literal translation. So the question is, ¿Qué nace cuando la mitad del lago va al baño? So this is the literal translation. What is born when half of the lake needs to go to the bathroom? It's an important question, right? So here we see that she's using parts of words, right? So this plasticity of words, part of lago, right? And also this idea of going to the bathroom, right? To go to the bathroom. And the answer is pencil, right? If you translate it literally, you lose half the joke. So pencil contains la of lago and pis of piss. So how would you translate it? Would you I am quite fond of la piss as a possible translation of it. But then we would have to think about how do we work with the question in order to get to that answer. And is it important that it's a pencil? Is it important that we get to that object, right? That would be the other question. Or is it okay to do away with the object because the more important thing is the wordplay within the question, and then the answer can be changed accordingly. No, go ahead. There's a
visual component with the pencil, too.
Yeah.
It makes it seem masculine, right?
Yes, exactly. So imagine all the things that you have to balance, but in English. So all of this is very rooted in the possibilities of Spanish, right? In the Spanish form. So it's not just that it's a form of question and answer, but the form of Spanish then has to be dealt with. So we'll look at some other adivinanzas and I'll show you kind of some of the solutions that I came up with. Her adivinanzas, as you can see from this example, are not about the penetration of words through their etymological history, their origins, although etymology would later become central to her work, but instead they envision within and between words unexpected relationships that then lead to unexpected answers. By containing the answer in the question, as in the hilo riddle, and by using both pun and paradox, Vicuña's adivinanzas undoubtedly follow in the riddle tradition, but with a difference. It is as if the words themselves were rewriting their history to reformulate their purpose, an autoethnography of sorts in which their identity is, to borrow from Edouard Glissant, in relation. Vicuña posits, quote, a history of words would be a history of being, but this text would be nothing more than a meditation that unfolds in fragments and inference from and for the imagination, end quote. The relationship between words and Vicuña's riddles is what constitutes its form, and its form, therefore, is inextricable from its content. As such, Vicuña's riddles present a particular problem for the translator who must contend with wordplay rooted in the Spanish language. This is a different problem from the one we have seen with Sor Juana, but nonetheless, in both cases, the question and the form in which it is delivered anticipates an answer. Rosemary Waldrop, in her essay, Silence, the Devil, and Jabez, argues that the translation of Edmund Jabez's work, in particular instances of paranomasia, or wordplay, as well as its question and answer form, must be driven by the understanding that Jabez, quote, posits language, more precisely the French language, as the basis of our thinking, end quote. But it is also informed by the work's motivational background. Quoting Gadamer, she writes, quote, nothing that is said has its truth simply in itself, but refers instead backward and forward to what is unsaid. Every assertion is motivated, that is, one can sensibly ask of everything that is said, why do you say that, right? So with every riddle, we can say, well, why would she ask that question, right? And why would she give us that answer? There's a context there that can't be done away with either in favor of wordplay. The translation of Jabez's wordplay, then, must be guided, at least partly, according to Waldrop, by the consideration that Jabez's book is written in the shadow of the Holocaust and that its form echoes, quote, orthodox rabbinical commentary, end quote. Following Waldrop's lead, my task in translated Vicuña's riddles was to consider how, as she says of Jabez's poetry, the physical characteristics of words lead to new thoughts, revealing, again, this is Waldrop's words, the dynamic relation between language and thinking. It was also important, however, to think of their motivational background as well as the evolving context surrounding them. So let's look at some adivinanzas. So these are the ones that I was able to translate, right? Remember that there are over 60, and I couldn't, the ones that you see here are the ones I was able to come up with a solution for in English. And these will appear in a Kelsey Street book, New and Selected Poems. Actually, I don't think it's called New and Selected Poems anymore, but it's a selected that is going to come out this year. So adivinanzas means riddles, but it also means to divine, right? So that doesn't come through in the word riddle in the same way. Okay, so let me show you, I'm showing you the original and a literal translation first before I show you my solutions here. So the first one, ¿cuál es la libélula que se une con el final del imperativo cortad, libertad? The literal translation, what is the dragonfly that joins the ending of the imperative cut, And the answer is liberty or freedom. Okay. Here's the answer. I'm sorry, actually, I think I put the answer here. Did I? Yeah. So this is the answer, and then in the next slide, I'll show you sort of how I broke it down. What happens when libido crashes a tea party? Liberty. That's my translation. So here's the second one. ¿Cuál es la consecuencia de un hombre duro que miente, un durmiente? What is the consequence of a hard man who lies, a sleeper? My translation is, what does the deceitful doorman do at night? He lies dormant. There is evidence that Vicuña intended to include these riddles from 1966, along with other poems, in her first poetry manuscript, her very first book, which she wanted to call Sabor a mí. This manuscript, although we can't be sure whether the final version included the riddles, in fact, right when I was writing this, Cecilia found in her archives that she had made a list of what she wanted in that manuscript, and the riddles were included. But it's possible that in later versions, as it got closer to publication, they were removed, so we can't be completely sure. Let me tell you a little bit the history of this. So the manuscript, although we can't be sure whether the final version included the riddles, was under contract with Ediciones Universidad Católica de Valparaíso in Chile when Vicuña left for London on an art scholarship in 1972. While in London, Vicuña noted that the book's publication was perpetually delayed, but she continued making art and writing poetry, and in 1973 put together an artist book for the British Beau Geste Press that would include her visual art, journal entries, and some self-translated versions of poems from Sabor a mí. On September 11, 1973, while assembling the artist's book, Vicuña learned that the Chilean military coup had taken place, and immediately Vicuña understood that it had to include a response to what was unfolding in her homeland. To the original content, she quickly added new material, a description of the grief and anger that slowly overtook her when she learned of Presidente Allende's suicide, as well as an unequivocal denunciation of the alliance between the Chilean military and the American CIA that had made the coup possible. Despite this historical axe blow that would forever divide her life and work, Vicuña gave the artist's book a nearly identical name as the 1971 manuscript, Sabor a mí. But this time, the taste of her, that's what Sabor a mí, it's the title of a tango, but it means the taste of her. But this time, the taste of her had turned bittersweet, and the selection of poems written between 1966 and 1971 became sad artifacts of a time when Vicuña had joyfully participated in a movement that embraced socialist ideals as the promise for a new Chile, in which gender, class, and racial equality could be achieved. Sabor a mí, published by Beau Geste Press soon after the coup, would become, unintentionally, Vicuña's first book. It is in this post-coup book, published in exile, that a selection of the riddles first appeared. So here's a page. These are the riddles. So of the 66, she chose a certain number of riddles. And I chose the riddles to translate from this selection. For many years, Sabor a mí remained in limbo, forgotten, until a new interest in her work by young Chilean artists and the U.S. literary critic Juliet Lind led to a 2013 version titled El Censurado. But what had happened to the manuscript under contract so many years ago? Had it simply been caught in the crosshairs of the coup? In her introduction to El Censurado, Lind provides some evidence gathered from interviews which helps to explain the fate of the 1971 Sabor a mí. One explanation is that even before the coup, the rector of the Universidad Católica Valparaíso, a Catholic university, scandalized by the manuscript's erotic, anti-ecclesiastical, and pro-socialist content, intervened and prevented its publication. Another explanation is that the manuscript, along with other books, was swept from the publisher's office by the military after the coup and thrown into the ocean, as were so many disappeared bodies. Although the feeling of possibility is palpable in the original manuscript, it is impossible to read these riddles in light of the coup without thinking of them as oracles of future political strife still unimaginable in 1966. As such, I was guided by the pleasure and playfulness of the 18-year-old Vicuña's encounter in her bedroom, and also the Vicuña in exile, whose idealism and belief in change was being tested. Is it back on the... So let's go back to the riddles for a minute so that I can sort of break down how I got to my answer by thinking about this larger context, these historical contexts, this sort of evolving context, as well as the wordplay. So if we look at the first one, libélula is such a sensual word to my ear. It seems to contain within it two words, belleza and luz, beauty and light. But it means dragonfly, right? But I can't help but hear those two words in it. And when I set out to find a way to approximate the wordplay, I also heard in it the word libido. But how would libido lead to liberty, right? I was trying to get from the question to the answer, and suddenly by choosing libido, I was starting on a particular direction, or I had to follow that direction. Thinking of the erotic poems Vicuña wrote during the period soon after, or in conjunction with when she wrote the riddles, thinking of the erotic poems Vicuña wrote during this period as part of a challenge to the Chilean political establishment, or sort of the ideas of the time, right? These erotic poems were a challenge to conservative Chilean political establishment. I imagined desire as a powerful disruptor of official functions, such as a tea party, that served to maintain and reinforce conservative ideals, a class system, a way to rein in and codify a woman's freedom. I also thought, so I was thinking both in terms of, what was sexual liberation at the time that she was writing this, what was the women's movement during this time in the context of that historical moment in Chile. And then, of course, I can't get away from the fact of what the Tea Party represents now, too, right? I also thought of Vicuña's account of how she and an informal group of young artists who called themselves the Tribu No, or the No Tribe, crashed the 1969 International Congress of Writers in Santiago, Chile, distributing flyers with messages like this one, cribbed from Artaud, that reads, "Long live poetry, down with conferences where functionaries have cocktails with government ministers." So they crashed it and they started distributing these papers around to all of the, big name literary figures who were invited there. So for the second one, let's go back to this again. Here, the hard man who lies becomes the doorman or gatekeeper in my translation. I tried to capture the web of lies, the various gatekeepers, the levels of action and inaction of hope and cynicism surrounding the military coup. As with most of these translations, a bit of translator's luck, as Waldrop calls it, offered me the double meaning of lies and lies, a deceit seemingly inert, but waiting to pounce. Let me show you a third one. This is the third one. Okay. So this is the third one I translated. So the riddle is, ¿Quiénes son los dulces enajenados de color morado? Los enamorados. And here we decided to join it with a palabra armas. So the first part, the riddle, is from 1966. And then Cecilia Vicuña says that she had a return of the word visions after the coup in England, and she started working on these visual poems in which the word itself contains the riddle. The word itself opens itself to show its paradoxes and puns within it. So we joined the first riddle with enamorados, enamor, morado, enajenados. So the literal translation of ¿Quiénes son los dulces enajenados de color morado? Is, who are the sweetly deranged of color purple? And the answer, the lovers. You know, if you're not trying to do the wordplay, they're good poems in and of themselves, right? Like, who are the sweetly deranged of color purple? The lovers. But thinking about the wordplay, I had to do something else, or I had to think about how this can happen in English. And then enamorados, you see how she takes the word lovers, right, and breaks it apart. And then she gets this other phrase from it, en amor morado enajenados. And en amor means in love. Morado can mean dwelling, bruised, purple, but it can also mean dwelling. To be morado is to dwell somewhere, to be somewhere. So I think I'm going to repeat myself, but I'll read what I have here. In order to translate this, I considered the paradoxes of love made verbally present in the Spanish. In particular, the tensions enacted by the words enajenados, which can mean to be deranged, alien, other, and morado, which can mean purple or bruised, but also dwelling, living, situated. The solution for me was not fidelity to the meaning. Instead, I wanted to parallel the form in terms of wordplay, allowing English words to help me divine distinct paradoxes. As such, we arrive at, is that in the right thing? Yes. Actually, I don't know if that's the literal translation, right? Do we have the frame right now?
It's on the previous slide.
Oh,
You've got it down on the bottom.
Yeah, okay. So this is the breakdown of it. I think maybe that'll help to look at this first. So here's the literal translation, right? We have who are the sweetly deranged of color purple, right? You see and also enamorados contains in amor by twos, because morado is to be moored or to dwell, right? To be in place by twos. But then the paradox, of course, is that the lovers are also deranged, estranged, bruised, alien, other. Okay. So. As such, we arrive at the reign, an intentional misspelling of reign, of the lovers, right? The free reign of lovers. Thinking about this erring or errantness, right? The movement of sort of making mistakes, but also dwelling and moving away is captured in the word err. So we arrive at the reign of lovers in which there is freedom to love and to be loved sweetly, eternally, but paradoxically to err, stray, become estranged, rule over the other, and be ruled. right? And so one of the things that I learned when I was thinking of maybe the way to represent, I realize now this is how I got to the word rain, is that I was thinking of purple as being the color of royalty, right? Because I couldn't figure out a way of how to include the word purple in the translation, and to also have this idea of paradox, or what the purple would mean as a paradox. So I arrived at the word rain, and what I found out is that the common misspelling of free reign is R-E-I-G-N, when it should be free R-E-I-N. So I thought it was an interesting opportunity to sort of play with those double meanings, or that the double meanings that sound when it's heard, like in the riddle, when we hear a word, when it can be heard one way or another, and that reign, to hold on to something, right? Or we think sort of like the kingdom of heaven, right? It's kind of beautiful place, but there's also this kind of ruling over someone. So this is the last part 4, the translator's question. I want to end on a personal note by sharing with you a different kind of riddle posed by Gayatri Spivak in the Poetics of Translation that has become for me, the child of working-class immigrants who never learned English, my oracle. Wondering how the pouvoir savoir, or as Spivak calls it, the shared skill which allows us to make common sense of things, end quote, is altered in the change of the mother tongue from immigrant mother to daughter. Spivak asks, when the daughter talks reproductive rights and the mother talks protecting honor, is this the birth or death of translation, end quote? That's a riddle. Spivak, like Sor Juana, provides no answer, but certainly she aims to provoke discussion, to have us consider the form and motivational background, as well as evolving contexts of each utterance. The utterance by the mother, the immigrant mother, the utterance by the native-born daughter, speaking different languages in so many ways. In doing so, I asked myself, could it be that although the mother and the daughter seem at odds with each other over a particularly delicate topic, it may very well be that out of their distinct historical and cultural contexts, each is signifying similar things, but in their own coded way? Or that both mother and daughter, by submitting themselves to the other, to the ways each speak out of their particular subject positions, the ways each moves rhetorically within language and within cultural expectations for their gender, can reach a common understanding, yet not identical conclusion? Is it more important to understand and represent the differences as a translator than to resolve them? I return as daughter and translator to Spivak's riddle time and again. Hasn't it always been my job to hear the fray, as Spivak calls it, of subjectivity rubbing up against various contexts, literary, historical, cultural? The fray that is itself the poem's rhetorical form, its particular use of language, what it says, how it says it, what it doesn't say. To be honest, I may be more successful as a translator than I have been as a daughter. Perhaps this is why Spivak uses this example. One wants the mother and daughter to move past their own subject positions into a space of common understanding, but it can also end, despite their kinship, in a deadlock. And perhaps this is the paradox of translation and also of mothering and daughtering that Spivak proposes. It is always a negotiation of form and content, of intimacy and estrangement, to work against the shadow and expectations of the other, to allow something to die, another thing to become lost, latent, or alas, to live differently. Thank you. I'm going to read mainly from my other tongue, or mother tongue. I'm going to start with a poem called At Hobby Lobby. So this poem was written after going to a Hobby Lobby, but this was before the Hobby Lobby decision. I feel like this poem takes on a new life continually, talking about evolving context. So now this is dedicated to the Supreme Court nominee who wrote the decision, or he sided with Hobby Lobby on that decision. Do you remember this, the Hobby Lobby? At Hobby Lobby. And I should say the reason I wrote this is not just because I visited a Hobby Lobby, but it reminded me, because at Hobby Lobby they cut fabric as well, right? You can buy pieces of fabric from bolts of fabric. And it reminded me of this place my mom used to work in called the Rag Shop, where her job was to fold these remnants of cloth. At Hobby Lobby. She tosses a bolt of fabric into the air, hill country, prairie, a horse trots there. I say 3 yards and her eyes say more. What you need is guidance, a hand that can zip scissor through cloth. You need a picture of what you've lost. To double the width against the window for the gathering, consider where you sit in the morning. Transparency is appealing, except it blinds us before day's begun. How I long to captain that table, to repeat in a beautiful accent a customer's request. My mother dug threads from buttons with her teeth, inquiring with a finger in the band if it cut into the waist, or kneeled against her client and pulled a hem down to a calf to cool a husband's collar. I can see this in my sleep among notions. My bed was inches from the sewing machine, a dress on the chair weeping its luminescent phrase. Sleep was the sound of insinuation, a zigzag to keep holes receptive, or awakened by a backstitch balling under the foot, a needle cracking, blood on a white suit. When my baby's asleep, I write to no one and cannot expect a response. The fits pour always. No one wears it out the door. But fashions continue to fly out of magazines like girls out of windows. Sure, they are my sisters, their machines, my own. The office from which I wave to them in their descent has uneven curtains made with my own pink and fragile hands. I'd forgotten also that there's the part of my mom was a seamstress, and she often had clients, like women that worked with her in the factory became her clients, and she would make clothes for them on the weekends. So they would often, my mom would try on, or they would try on the clothes my mom had made in my bedroom where the sewing machine also was. So there's a lot of references to textile here. I have a long history. My mom worked in a textile factory. My dad worked in a textile factory. My mom was a seamstress. I can't get away from the metaphor. This is called Dear Maria. Dear Maria, dear Mary, Mariah, Marie, dear Mama, Mamacita, and Mommy, dear fourth wheel of the Trinity, dear Puerto Rican ingenue in a red sash, dear off with their heads, dear diva, dear aria missing its M, dear storage engine, dear ships in your name, dear asteroid discovered in 1877, dear song by Café Tacuba, Green Day, the Jacksons, Men at Work, Blondie, Ricky Martin, Wu-Tang Clan, et al. Dear Maria, spoken in the bird's tail of Papua New Guinea, how do you solve a problem like Maria? Dear pool-type reactor, dear uranium, how you enrich us, dear Spanish biscuit, dear sacrificial virgins of red or blonde hair, of dark brunette, of the slip, apron, or veil, but never a hat, of the fresh complexion turned composite, of Jack the Ripper's complete works, of fluency in Welsh, Spanish, English, Quechua, French, of obscure and undocumented origins, and of Las Colonias, Querida María de los Ángeles, de la Luz, de Jesús, del Refugio, walking home or waiting for transporte de personal without executive safe routes. Dear Señorita Maquiladora, dexterous, tolerant of tedium, model workers for Lexmark, Foxconn, Comscope, etc. Dear Queen of the Plasma TV and print cartridge, dear Miss Stainless Steel Appliance, dear crowned with cigarettes, soda cans, boot prints, dear left without nipples in the desert branded, dear Virgen de Guadalupe, hand us your sanitary napkin, blessed art thou, your blood is on everything. Heritage speaker. What good is it to erect of absence a word like radiator when we've vents that expel heat as air? When I teach my daughter to speak and build a woman out of me that is not her mother but some propriety, a treason of simple subjects, I never had use in Spanish for the word barn, and then woke up and a horse was staring at me. Joe Brainerd. Softly pureed, cooled, this diction dumb in either tongue. But what is a mother's warmth if not her wit? Bernadette Mayer turns to me in the shower and says, motherhood is now fashionable among the girl poets. If so, I want my hat, a feather in it, Mallarmé's, in fact. So that poem has two misremembered lines. One is from Joe Brainerd. So I remember the Joe Brainerd line as woke up and a horse was staring at me, but actually it says, I remember waking up somewhere once and there was a horse staring me in the face. So I misremembered that line when I wrote the poem. And then the Bernadette Mayer, there's the line that begins, I think it's one of the sonnets, first turn to me after a shower. So, I started writing this book when my daughter was born in 2009. And so it takes me a while to write books. And so she's 7 now. And it's interesting how many of these poems still feel really relevant in this political climate. And so I'm going to read one. I was thinking a lot about questions of healthcare, questions of Medicare, Medicaid, who's going to take care of the sick, the elderly, what's going to happen to people when they retire and they don't have anything in their 401ks. So the precarious condition of a lot of people that the Occupy movement were trying to draw attention to. And I wrote this right at the beginning of the Occupy Wall Street movement when that was happening. So the poem is called The 11th Day of Occupy Wall Street. Now, obviously, I wasn't there. I was at home with my daughter, but I was writing about this. And the reason that I was really drawn to what was happening is because I used to be an office temp in Wall Street for many years. And I thought, Occupy Wall Street, it was talking about me at that time when I didn't have health insurance. I was working in those Wall Street offices without health insurance and hoping I would get a gig for a week or a few days so that I could make rent. But I also asked myself, would I have been brave enough to join the movement, or would I have felt I have to go to work because I can't pay rent? The 11th day of Occupy Wall Street starts with the epigraph from E.M.C. Iran's book, A Short History of Decay. The state feeds on their anemia. One. Oh, and I should also point out that at the same time, because I didn't have enough things going on with being a mother and all this other stuff, is my mother's health started to decline. So you're going to hear sort of my mother going through these health and cognitive issues in this poem. 1. So the 11th day of Occupy Wall Street, 1. And my mother close to spending her last cent on transfusions, which Edna St. Vincent Millay likened to poetry translation. All the blood sacks screened for habits classed by type and not by temperament, loosen an immigrant's militance, a name and a place of origin. My mother says, this is a young person's blood. I can feel it rolling down my thighs. What if, in the most terrible collision, blood type between mother and daughter, between original and copy, proves incompatible? We prick each finger, smear 2 glass slides, and place them on a text called the future. A rejection of another's blood, a faulty translation, won't necessarily kill you, but your own blood, reintroduced into your body, quite literally, is not without its dangers. 2. A young woman with belly bare, another with breasts exposed to autumn air, demands written on their bodies, read by a rush of cameramen. In the performance that is protest, that is being pretty, prettiness is currency, is capital gain. When the protest or parade turns ugly, both the pretty and the plain lose their shirts, chased or pulled into the crowd's dark center, its leagues of fingers. They are lost or expelled, a lesson taught. 3. Although there's blood in this poem, that's not the plot. The plot is money. Money's the plot. 4. I was a Wall Street temp, rose into buildings now gone or netted over. I said hello as a corporation, lost calls, passwords, wore the wrong thing. I dreamed of marrying myself onto the main island. Lovers were easy as bike rides through the park, a deck of outcomes like assignments or cubicles. One begins to believe vigor a resume. Some nights I locked myself out and climbed the escape. It was a place to lay my head or await a proper diagnosis. Confused by my choices, I was told the slit in the skirt would distract the traitors, particularly the Venezuelan, a diplomat's son. Finish faxing and pack up your pumps. We were a colony of temps, each sent to work a parcel of land as punishment for our cheap taste. 5. A shirt mooned with dye and sweat enters the kitchen. This picture serves as entrance into a mind, the fake brick backsplash, the curvy mahogany cornice over the sink, my father's face at the threshold of air conditioning, handing his wife a check. They say dirty for gross pay and clean for net. My parents' passbook savings stamped weekly by the neighborhood girl who professed not to know Spanish. I know who you are, my mother once told her through the glass partition. Now all the money's gone. We lose our name in its absence. Money as autobiography, as fairy tale mirror. 6. The word overtime astounds me now, so far from the old measurements. Also cash, a wonder, a sonnet. 7. I dream I've drugged my way out of place, I've slept my place out of me. I announce to my students that this is the only way to where we are from. I try to reconstruct the bodies each, but I confuse them. I try to meet that thought. I try to hear what it is. It's a chanting. I rally the mob against my current body. Someone in a Guy Fawkes mask carries a sign denouncing my many exuberances. Now I'm on to something. A reporter flips open his notebook and skips over me. No photograph to accompany my side. No record of the story. 8. I worked for coffee, sugar, and cocoa and learned the art of the spit, levels of acidity, how to return things a lady boss ordered from the home shopping network. She also kept me waiting in the women's section of Bloomingdale's, and after I was educated, did time at Planned Parenthood with posters of runaways and a baby in a pinafore. I was then reading Creeley. That and the neurologist, you could say I was out of pocket in the sense the vibrations ran through my legs and through my privacies. One who sleeps in commercial districts is regularly made public and awakened for repair. There was also the weird guy down the hall who dragged his trash down the stairs and later held a hooker against her will. Her name was Rosa. True story. 9. On the phone, my mother confuses words. She hears worry inside of story, a swift kick thundering from sweet kiss. Driving back from Canada years earlier, she wished her kids could sing for her knee surgery. The notes I carried, idle in traffic just that side of the border, were rheumatoid. But what do I know about melody, Ma? I'm an American. I need images. 10. In the great tradition of courtly love, a modern-day sonneteer sets out to serve women engaged in the cause, and with his subtle and wistful lens, slows the lashes and mouth as they open suddenly for him. The bony flecks of shoulder blades, hair fanning softly near a tattoo. Every frame enjambs to unfold one labile body after another. Hope exits their mouths as warm air. And just to make clear the powers they denounce are inescapable, he names it Hot Chicks of Occupy Wall Street. 11. I fold cash for the house cleaner in thirds, and she tucks it into her sweater pocket as she tells me about her son. A bus trip back home. We both talk as if nothing has just happened. I thank her for all she's done. 12. The drug or dare I took was a bus daily to push out into some place, the someone I might be. The place now, the pushing of someone out of me. After they've wiped blood off the baby, I know this place is a dream called money. But money recedes into the scenery just as the scenery grows greener around me. 13. My mother's early bedtime closes the gap on wakefulness, each day shorter. Democratic awakening turns, televised weather, a dim forecast from her mechanical bed. Ask her about that hurricane sweeping across the oil-rich end of Texas she imagines me in. So one of the many insults of getting older is needing readers. So when I have the readers on, I can't actually see you very well. And also, I was sort of horrified when I got the galley, and I said to my colleague, who's much younger, and I was like, oh, "They made the type so small." And she looks at it, she goes, "No, it's normal." Paramore. English is dirty, polyamorous. English wants me. English rides with girls and with boys. English keeps an open tab and never sleeps alone. English is a smooth talker who makes me say, please. It's a bit of role playing, and I like a good tease. We have a safe word I keep forgetting. English likes pet names. English has a little secret, a past, another family. English is going to leave them for me. I've made English a set of keys. English brings me flowers stolen from a grave. English texts me, slips in as emojis, attaches selfies not suitable for work. English has rules but accepts dates last minute. English makes booty calls. English makes me want it. When I was younger, my parents said, keep that English out of our house. If you leave with that miserable, don't come back. I said, God willing, in the language of the Inquisition. I climbed out my window but always got caught. English had a hoopty that was the joint. Now my mother goes gaga over our cute babies. Together, English and I wrote my father's obituary. How many times have I said it's over and English just laughs and says, come on, senorita, let's go for Chinese. We always end up in a fancy hotel where we give fake names, and as I lay my head to hear my lover breathe, I dream of Sam Patch plunging into water, a poem English gave me that had been given to another. You guys know what a hoopty is? Yeah, you know, right? Yeah, but you love it, right? It's like, it's a beat up car. It's like a jalopy, right? But it's like, it's your boo, right? Like, you love that car. But I often have to explain it because I think it may be an East Coast thing, and it's also not really used anymore. But there was even a song called My Hoopty, like a long time ago, like a rap song called My Hoopty. So I'm going to end with a short one. A little bit different in tone. So I was talking to Eleni about this. This book, My Other Tongue. Many of the poems, because my mother's health started to decline around the same time, or soon after my daughter was born. It really does, many of the poems anticipate her death, right? It's obvious that she's not well, she's cognitive decline, she's in a wheelchair. So the book does sound like an elegy to her, right? And it's not just an elegy to her, it's also about mothering, but all the sort of the complications, as Jeffrey rightly pointed out, of trying to mother and also sort of let go of a mother at the same time. But she actually passed away after the book was completed. So this last poem is interesting to me, Ghost Song, because it was written because I was thinking about my mother and thinking about her as if she had died, even though she was still alive. Like, thinking about her, I was like, oh, yeah, like when she was still alive. And then I caught myself and I said, wait, she's still alive. So this poem, Ghost Song, is sort of combines that moment with also this aspect of mothering. So there are a lot of nursing, poems about nursing in here as well. So you'll hear this in this. Ghost Song. 3 times on Saturday, I remember you as dead, Mother. I reach under my shirt, surprised to find the nipple dry, surprised there's something left of you, an orange I section in the sun and hand to my daughter. The fight this morning to part evenly her hair. Ghost milk again on the nipple as I make the bed. Bitters drained from eggplant, black liquid through a colander. Bedtime is classic matricide. She touches my nipple through pajama shirt and sings as Sappho to her beloved, I like your beauty, beauty. Thank you.